Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to turn to Kaiser Report regular Simon Rose of SaveOurSavers.co.uk. Simon Rose, welcome back to the Kaiser Report.
Thank you very much, Max.
Now you have a cricket injury, I understand.
Yes, I am a very, very bad cricketer on a very bad cricket team, so we get injured more than people who actually play the game properly, yes.
But isn't cricket just an excuse to drink?
It is an excuse to drink, an excuse to have really nice teas, an excuse to go to lovely English villages and stand out in pouring rain wondering why you're doing it. Yep, you've hit it right on the head.
Okay, well, that's what I thought. All right, so let's talk about Mervyn King. This is his last week in the job as Governor of Bank of England. Next week, Mark Carney from Canada takes over. Will the new regime be better or worse for savers? And what about inflation?
Yeah, I think almost certainly Mark Carney is going to be somebody who is going to want to come up with more quantitative easing. I can't believe that he's going to want to do nothing. I mean, when anybody comes into a new job, the best thing always is to do nothing. But of course, everybody wants to prove that there's a good reason they've been paid an enormous amount of money and an immense relocation allowance. So I'm afraid, I think Carney, certainly, there was a wonderful Canadian news program recently about central banking, about quantitative easing, what effect it's had on savers. And Carney was interviewed, and he seems to have no sympathy whatsoever for savers. So I don't think that if it's up to Carney, we're going to have a good time ahead. But of course, since the Fed started talking about tapering, we are seeing rates generally going up, whether it's temporary or not. I don't yet know.
All right, so the interest rates have been inching higher, not as a result of policy, but as a result of people jumping out of the bond market, because now there's panic in the bond market. There's a bond market sell-off. People are saying this could be a new crisis. Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland says this could be a new crisis, but it's really a continuation of the exact same crisis, because after the Lehman collapse, the bankers came in and they introduced things like quantitative easing to keep interest rates low as a way to try to recapitalize the banks. But the banks simply kept committing the same fraud that they've been committing all along. We find out now, for example, audio tapes released from Anglo-Irish Bank that the executives were laughing about luring the government into giving bailout money to them to the tune of tens of billions. Same thing in the UK. The big four banks who got bailed out and nationalized, they're laughing to the bank. They're laughing at the citizens who are subsidizing this through their savings, correct?
Yeah. We've had 5 years of low interest rates with people like you and Save Our Savers telling everybody if you keep interest rates low in a debt crisis, we are going to get more debt, we are not going to solve the problems, and it's going to be appalling. So you get an indication that interest rates are going up, which any sensible person overpaid in the financial market should have understood was a possibility, and they panic. It's extraordinary.
So the average UK cricket-playing, pub-loving, tea-liker is getting hurt two ways. Their savings accounts are getting demolished. And we've already covered the fact that for every pound that people might save in a mortgage or other interest rate sensitive product, they're losing 3 in their savings account. So the mathematics of that are horrible. They're just gutting the industry. And number two, it's created more instability. The debt levels in the UK since George Osborne and folks introduced austerity have gone up.
There's this extraordinary idea that somehow we're going through savage cuts on austerity in the UK, but spending in real terms is going down very slightly, but our deficit is staying at £120 billion a year. The total government debt is going up by 50% during the life of this Parliament. And that's with interest rates incredibly low. If they do start going back, well, it's not going to be pretty. But as you say, savers have had their money plundered. And for some reason, savers are taking it on the chin. I mean, they're not happy. We get people grumbling all the time. They are angry, but they're not doing anything. And yet, if they've been mugged by people in the street, it would be considered a crime wave. That'd be absolute outrage.
Well,
£220 billion has been taken from UK savers and given to, essentially, to the people who borrowed imprudently. And why is there no outrage? Because it suits the government, it suits the bankers, and it suits the people who've got their mortgages.
The government and the media like to portray this as a victimless crime.
Yes.
And that's why there's not outrage, because they believe that the crime. But we see the global insurrection against banker occupation in now Brazil. 1 million people in the street. We've seen it all over Europe. We've seen it all over the world. This is where the tip of the spear, the burning edge of this pushback against what we see in the UK and the US is happening. But, I wanted to ask you this. I went over the weekend to an event here in London near Westminster. This was organized by the TUC and the NUT. These are labor organizers. And they're all about restoring some kind of semblance of representational democracy and government and, the left. Save the left, essentially. Save Britain's socialist model. But, the fact is that save our savers, couldn't you argue that why not save the right? Why not save capitalism? Because what we're talking about here is not capitalism.
No, it's crony.
Well,
it's called crony capitalism, but the word capitalism doesn't even count.
How come we can't get an event down in Westminster and get 4,000 people to show up to say save capitalism?
We'd love it if 4,000 people showed up.
But
and
isn't
did
that what's at stake?
But that's the important thing. A lot of people think what we've got is capitalism. What we've got is a failure of capitalism. It's not. We've got these banks that are too big to fail, too big to jail, we now understand, in the States. Well, they're just too big. I mean, I'm sorry, the problem is they're so big, they can lobby for whatever they want. Which politician is going to try and bring down the banks or reform them? I mean, what? But you got me annoyed now. Yeah, well, what I need is another 3,999 people, and we've got to move.
So when you say save our savers, what you're saving there is capital, and capital is the basis of capitalism.
Yeah.
You want to save capitalism? I want to save capitalism.
With inflation, which has recently ticked up again in the UK, we've now got to the position where it's almost impossible. No, it is actually now impossible for a cash saver to preserve their capital at all. What you're seeing is it being eroded all the time. And there's this impression given, as you say, that somehow it's because of some force that nobody can control. That's not true at all. It's because inflation is a man-made thing. I mean, you can control inflation if you want to. Yeah, you can control interest rates. The problem is what they're doing all the time is suppressing free market capitalism. This is a form of crony capitalism that everybody on whatever side of the political spectrum they are should be objecting to. It doesn't work. They lowered interest rates and they believe somehow the economy will pick up. We are never going to return to the world we had 10 years or so ago.
What's the government say the official rate of inflation is?
At the moment, CPI, which is the one they like, is 2.9%. The Bank of England admits it's going to get to over 3%, which probably means it's going to go higher.
But what's the real rate? If you look at real,
most people reckon it's about double that. It's hard to tell. I was looking at various substances in the shopping basket
they use. So it's really like 6%.
Well, it's hard to tell. Unlike the States, where they have this wonderful website called Shadow Stats, where they calculate all the indices the way they were calculated before people started tinkering with them. Well, that's fantastic. We don't have an equivalent in the UK. A couple of people have tried setting things up, and it looks as if.
So, anecdotally speaking, if you look at the price of food and things that people actually buy...
I mean, potatoes have gone up 40% in the last year alone.
Okay, let's say it's between 5 and 6%, the real rate of inflation. What's the rate of wage growth in this country right now?
Oh, it's about, if it's growing at all, it's growing less than 1%.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, people are getting squeezed all the time. Yeah, it's not just savers. Everybody is feeling poorer.
Yeah.
But they think there's nobody to blame. Well, of course there are people to blame. And the banking commission that's recently looked into the banks. I mean, one of the interesting things was they wanted personal responsibility. They wanted to know who can we blame when things go wrong. But that should be the same for politicians. It should be the same for central bankers.
But I know who we can blame. Jeffrey Osborne.
Jeffrey Osborne, yes.
I mean, George Osborne. Yeah, we like to kick him on this show because he's so, adorable.
Yes, like a sweet little puppy. Yes, I know. The bizarre thing
let me ask you about George Osborne. Now, he introduced this Help to Buy scheme.
Oh, yes.
To deal with the absence of a real economy here in the UK in the housing market. Now, this Help to Buy scheme is just another Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. And apparently, according to an article in the Wall Street Journal, was introduced without consulting with or against the opposition of the Treasury and without consulting with the Bank of England. Even Mervyn King knew that one wasn't a very good idea.
Isn't that socialism, though? How come he's not out with TUC and NUT, save our socialists? Because he's providing welfare for home builders and banksters.
Absolutely. Well, one of the problems, I suppose, is that our welfare bill is still growing enormously because too much is promised to people who aren't earning, and that's always, of course, on the back of the people who are earning paying taxes. Well, Osborne's done nothing to correct that problem, and with an aging population, that's going to become increasingly difficult. Eventually, something will give.
How does he call himself a Tory?
The thing is, Osborne, well,
It's no Tory I would be familiar with.
Most proper conservatives would say that neither Osborne nor Cameron are conservative in the traditional sense.
But what is this mushy policies that they pursue? It's not based on economics.
They're
it's not based on mathematics.
They're politicians who just want to get elected again in 2 years' time. That's all.
And the debts are exploding in size.
Well, either they think they're not going to be around, so it's going to be somebody else's problem, or they somehow think people aren't going to notice. The thing is, Osborne, Geoffrey or George, or Gideon as his real name was before he changed it, is not an economist. He's an historian. Well, you don't need to think back very far to see what happens when you start supporting the mortgage market, when you start tinkering with it, when the government takes a stake in the mortgage market. It is perfectly possible. The economy will start growing and their chestnuts will be hauled out of the fire and everything will be okay. But I wouldn't want to bet on it, and I don't know anybody else who would. Right, it's going to go badly wrong.
Just to be clear, the government is essentially guaranteeing the mortgages up to 20% of the mortgage, and the same in a repeat of the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac that in America, which guaranteed mortgages, that led to the subprime crisis and a crisis of 2007, 2008, as we understand. Let's get back to Mark Carney.
But I still don't understand why they want to support house prices. I can understand wanting to encourage more people to own homes, but when you've already got the price of a typical suburban semi in London costing in real terms 10 times the price it did in the 1930s, something has gone very, very badly wrong. And why, when we talk about the price of potatoes go up, is that a bad thing? But somehow it's great if your house price goes up. You can't export your house. It's not a product that's generating wealth.
Okay, but that's a good question, because I think it speaks to the British character, because here in Britain, people ascribe huge value to their home. You know, my man's castle is his home. Everyone wants to be a frickin' wannabe aristocrat with their big plant, you know, their big... Downton Abbey has done more damage to the psyche of this country than even the Sex Pistols allegedly did back in the 70s. That Downton Abbey is the most radically misinformed propaganda that one could ever imagine coming out of the psychosis of the whoever produced that show. It was the BBC, I would imagine.
It's ITV, actually.
Oh, ITV. I knew that wasn't the BBC this time. It was ITV. But there's a mentality there that if you own a house, no matter how badly you screw up the economy, no matter how much debt you go into. Remember in Downton Abbey, that guy almost went bankrupt, as I recall, in the later episodes.
Yes, absolutely.
Lord Stutipus almost went bust.
You say, yes, an Englishman's home must be his castle. Well, of course, that's what we might need, because if this goes really badly wrong, we could see social disorder. I mean, eventually something is going to give.
Right, and you say going back to tenant farming. In other words, when Wonga, which is a terrorist, a terrorist in this country operating, a financial terrorist, when they introduced interest rates at 5,000%, that's the same thing that's worse than tenant farming. People would gladly rather be tenant farmers than pay Wonga 5,000% on a loan.
Yes, but of course we've got government ministers saying they want to build on fields because they don't seem to understand that's where food actually comes from. But most people don't have houses, are not going to be able to grow their own vegetables, and not even going to be able to protect them if they do. But the problem is only you and I and savers and certain groups of people understand just how mad this has all become. But the problem is the people that are paid so much money in the financial markets and in government and the civil service, either they don't understand or they pretend they don't, but somehow we feel it's us that are going to be put in the straitjackets, not them.
All right, Simon Rose of Save Our Savers, we got to go. We're out of time. But while you're nursing your cricket injuries, we'll give this some thought. All right, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Max. Bye.
And that's all the time we have for this episode of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Simon Rose of SaveOurSavers.co.uk. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Kaiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.